I want to help professionals leverage business. I don't really want to help business leverage professionals, because whether you're talking physicians, accountants, engineers, architects, like, business shouldn't be dominant in a profession. The profession should just learn better business skills. People are just so busy and consumed, and that does not mean you're hacking in the right direction. There's too much at stake today to not know where you want to go and solve for that versus figure it out on the way. And that's going to hurt people, and it doesn't inspire the next generation. In fact, it's hurting leaders to not cast that vision.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Design Development, your hub to learn direct from top performers in real estate development, design, and construction. I'm your host, Renz Hayes, founding partner of H&O Lifelong Learner, and I am personally obsessed with high-powered organizations and the leaders that guide them. If this is your first time listening, thanks so much for joining us. And if you're a returning listener, can't thank you enough. Let's go. It's my pleasure to introduce today's guest, Peter Atherton. He's the former executive. He's on the board of directors and majority shareholder of Wright Pierce, a large civil engineering firm. They expanded during his time. They expanded from one office in Maine up to 10 offices in greater New England and down in Florida. Peter has walked the walk. He's talked the talk. He's executed. He's gone through the pain points. He's tried to grow. He launched ActionsProve. He shares his insights through a podcast. He does masterminds. He does strategic planning, executive coaching. He helps solve culture problems with employee engagement. He's really giving everything he's learned. He's giving back to the industry, and I think he's a tremendous asset. So it's my pleasure to share his story and his insights with you. So without further ado, let's get to my conversation with Peter Atherton. Please join me in welcoming Peter Atherton. Peter, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
All right, we've got to know each other through LinkedIn primarily. We're both passionate about AEC leadership, strategic planning, growth. So we've had a lot in common, and it's allowed us to build a relationship over the past few years. Would you help tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what ActionsProve is all about?
So, well, a little bit about myself. I mean, I like to jokingly say I'm a fully recovered principal engineer. So I'm a professional engineer, civil engineer, and my first 24 years were in practice. Just sort of rose through the ranks as an junior engineer, project engineer, project manager. At a fairly young age, became a principal and major firm owner. In the majority of my career, I was in that position, helping to grow a firm. And about 6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago now, I took sort of I didn't want to. I realized years before that I didn't want to do this for the next 20, 25 years. And so at the age of 40, I decided I was going to do something different. And at the age of 45, my birthday gift to myself was to go out on my own and do management consulting work, although I didn't quite know what I was going to do at the time. But I started ActionsProve, and that just sort of, now half a dozen years into management consulting. So working with firms across the country, cross disciplines, different sizes, although I do have a filter on really working with owner-led organizations, but a lot of strategic planning, leadership team development. Have a podcast now for the last 3.5 years and host 3 masterminds, in addition to a number of other sort of research projects. You mentioned Anthony and I, we're 3 years in a row now doing independent primary research into really what's happening in our industry and why, to give real insight. So just really, I've loved so many different seasons of my career and absolutely love the one I'm in now.
Love that. And I would say it's easy, it's apparent to see your passion about what you're doing. You love the leadership space, the consulting, the masterminds. You really enjoy looking at the industry as a whole and trying to solve big problems. So we're going to get all into that. You mentioned something in your story there. You were a fairly young principal in your firm. Could you talk about that journey when you were early in your engineering career, seeking leadership? What kind of skills were you focused on? How did you get that opportunity?
Well, the opportunity was definitely presented to me, and I took it. And it was very inspirational when I joined the second firm that I was with. But I think it starts earlier than that. I mean, I'm first generation American. My folks are British. My sisters and I were born and raised in Boston, and I the entrepreneurial spirit of what it means to be a U.S. citizen. I embraced that growing up. Grew up got a middle class, but we had some financial insecurity. My dad was in the nuclear industry, big moratorium in the 80s, lost his job. And so I had this entrepreneurial kind of in me. I just had a paper route a year before I was supposed to. That was in me. I grew through some financial insecurity, wanted to sort of solve that. But I'd say also pivotal was my first 5 years in the industry. I worked for Metcalf and Eddy in Boston, and I was pretty confident as a young person, and I only wanted to work for two firms, either Metcalf and Eddy, who wrote the book. I wanted to be a water wastewater engineer, or Camp Dresser and McKee at the time, and I held out until I got offers from both, and I selected Metcalf and Eddy for different reasons. But I'll say they were a very confident organization. Again, they wrote the book, and I think there were probably 2,000 people at the time, but it felt so small. And still today, my whole career, like I felt more as part of a team doing very important, high purpose work in an atmosphere with incredible people really focused on the end goal, which was positive impact. And so that was pivotal. And I was invited the Metcalf and Eddy days. Like there was definitely, well, will you make it here? But in a very comforting way. Sure. But people saw things in me, and I got invited to, as a junior person, I got invited to meetings with clients. And, I was told kind of in no uncertain terms, you are not to say anything, you are to make incredible notes, and I want those tomorrow afternoon, but to be at the table. And I got invited to principal meetings where it's kind of don't say a word. And then but I could see how the business was being, and right then, probably in my second year, I kind of knew what a principal was. And I'm like, I want to be a principal. I know I have to do a ton of work to be a great engineer, and I want to be, but I want to be a principal.
And those are two different skills.
They are, but I saw how a principal needed to know what they were doing and how they taught. And I saw, because early on, the exposure of you have to be convincing in the moment, and you can't fake it. And so I gravitated to people who were very technical and could convince in a very authentic way that they knew what they were doing. So I'm convincing you to hire the firm, we will deliver. So I kind of saw the full meal deal, like a series of Michael Jordans, if you will, in the business. I'm like, wow, I want to be that. Knowing it was going to take a ton of work to do so. Unfortunately, at the time, I had to leave Metcalf and Eddy. I mean, my wife and I, we had our kids super young, and we couldn't afford a house outside of Boston, and we just couldn't make it work. I was working days, she was working nights, and I think every time we realized that we were saving half the money and the costs were going up twice as fast. And so I needed an out, and we ended up moving out of the region, and ended up the third of three firms, threw them on the list at the end. But anyway, I interviewed with a bunch of, couple firms that I'm like, I will work with them. And I was so disappointed. And I got this third company, Wright Pierce, and one office in a little town in Maine. And I went up there, and I was so frazzled. Like, I can't believe I'm going to let my family down. I can't get another job because the two that I really thought I wanted to work for and would do well with, I wasn't interested. And so I'm like, but I'll just go do my third. And I was late for the interview because I didn't realize how far north Topsom, Maine was from Portland, Maine. And I showed up a half an hour late, and this wonderful person was waiting at the front desk. I walked in the door. She said, "Welcome, Peter. They're waiting for you in the boardroom." And so anyway, I had this interview, and there was a probably 7 ex-M&E people around the table. And they just started grilling me. I mean, it was more congenial than that. But anyway, they were like questioning whether I was good enough for the firm. And that sort of got, and then I was like, so,
was
okay.
This technical? Were they
very technical? Like, oh, you designed this treatment plant and you did, fine bubble diffusers. Did you look at ceramic diffusers? What was the analysis? Oh, you designed this. What did you look at? And so tell me about your report writing. Do you outsource that? Do you do it yourself? And I was just like, okay, this is going on. I've done my research too. You say you're all about this. However, we just competed with you on a project. And so they're like, yeah, okay, yeah, you're right about that. Yeah, we had an issue here. So it was just incredible back and forth. Wait, long story, just a little bit longer. I hopped in the car and no bag phone. I mean, I had a bag phone at best. And anyway, so 2 hours back to Massachusetts. When I was like, there's no way I'm getting a job here. And the two that I really thought I was interested in, I'm not. And when I got home, my wife said, I got a call from, the HR person at the time and said, you have an offer letter on the way from right here. So
Really
anyway,
cool.
but what the principals at the time there said, I don't care how long you've been here. If you can produce, you're going to have an opportunity. It's not about years in the seat. It's not about this. If you can perform, you will get it. And so that was like, went up, kind of renegotiated a little bit to at least make what I was making.
Something they did right there was they made it performance based. Like if you can deliver, you should be rewarded for that. It has nothing to do with time, experience. It's all about what outcomes can you produce?
Yeah. So that was the opportunity. And again, I nothing yet. It was a blank sheet of paper, but that's what I mean. I was in financial insecurity myself as an adult. So I wanted to make it happen. And it was so that combination was just, brilliant. And I see that if you offer people opportunities, it is so attractive. Even with this new generation, which I think they're fabulous, as a group. But high achievers want opportunity. And so that was a long-winded way to maybe answer your question, but it was offered and I took it.
I think companies offering opportunities for their people is something we need to dive into on the detail. I want to highlight something I think you did really well, and I'd like people to have a takeaway that are working on building their career, is really doing their research to understand the companies that are going to create the opportunity and the environment for them to gain the lessons, to learn the lessons, to gain the experience for them to achieve their career goals. And you don't have to have your whole career mapped out in day one or even in year 5 or 10. Both of our careers, they continue to evolve year over year, whether you're at the same company or a new company or whatever it is, right?
Well,
But
and that
having a
evolution is
plan,
true.
you got to be in a place to learn.
Exactly. And there are very distinct lines with firms that I think get it and firms that are just going through the motions. They're just old school versus, really creating opportunity, growing for a reason, not just for growth's sake or that they're on the M&A drug. Like just really growing because they want to make a difference. They want to create those opportunities and they're going to grow smart. They're going to grow right. Those firms are attracting the best talent. And there really is a distinct line that I see and where I say, do you have compliant employees? Do you have engaged employees? Or do you have employees that have opted in? Which
How does
is sort
someone
of
looking for this type of company, like what are some things they can look for to gauge whether it is that type of company? It's hard to see from the outside. You have to do a lot of work in trying to figure that out. What are some of the things we look for?
well, I don't want to speak too broad brush, but by and large, if they're owner-led firms focused on local impact, they're probably a good bet. If and again, there's a role for different types of ownership structure, public firms, other investor-led firms. I mean, there's a role. I don't want to, but owner-led, I think that's where the owners care. And that's where you're going to see the opportunities because they need to transition their firm to another generation. They have an interest in transitioning their firm to the next generation. And I always, when I talk to firms about strategic planning or ownership succession, there is this, it comes down to a decision to make because internal ownership succession is very hard, but that creates opportunities for people. Right. And so, but also is if you want to maximize the value of an exit, that's very hard too. Right. And it's actually the same thing. Like you need a next generation of talent who are interested in sticking around. You need to diversify your client base, all the same things, whether you want to maximize an exit or you want to do internal trade. It's actually all the same.
Totally agree.
However, if you're interested in having, if you're an ownership team and you're concerned, you don't know what the best strategy is. I always ask the question, or one of the, are you in, what's better, local jobs or local wealth? Well, local jobs are good. Yeah, local jobs are good. But what's better for communities? If you're interested in the communities where you live, work, serve, and play, if you're interested really in that next generation where people can't afford a house. I mean, there's a lot of financial needs, right? If you really want to invest in your local communities, right? And I'm not saying it's not easy. Local wealth is the key, because people will be invested and they will make it happen if they have a stake in their local communities. And local communities tend to, most of our work in AEC is local. Clients invest in local before. I mean, again, I'm not saying there aren't regional players and statewide and international players, but most of our business is local. If we're creating local wealth, it is just much more aligned and it creates much more opportunities. And 80-something% of all firms are local, small to mid-sized firms. So long-winded way to maybe answer your question. I think you have to do your homework. I think ownership structure matters. I think intent of owners matters. And I think if they're invested in the long-term health and development of a community or a series of local communities, that's probably your quickest path to long-term success. That being said, I mean, if you know you want to pick up certain skill sets and mindsets, I mean, you could have other stops along the way. I mean, people do build their careers for certain amounts of information. Working at a large company to start with, it was incredible for me. Then going to a small firm, it was incredible in other ways. And then helping to grow that from a small to a mid-size, one office to regional firm, multiple offices, all organically, was a different experience, but it was all great to building your career.
You mentioned like creating wealth in the local community, and I think how individual private companies can contribute to that is running a balanced organization that creates opportunity for their people, and creating opportunity gives them career upside and earning potential. So if you find a company that's focused on growth and creating opportunity for their people, you want to ask questions around that. You want to understand not what is your offer today. It's like, what are my opportunities over the next 5 years if I hit X, Y, and Z benchmarks? You got to create a map, and you want to have those types of conversations so you can get a feel for ownership in the company that you're joining, right?
Yeah.
I think Wright Pierce, and your move from, I forget the name of the company in Boston, from your
Metcalf
Boston
Finetti.
firm to Wright Pierce, you left was it a large firm to a smaller firm at the time? And then you helped scale Wright Pierce. Could you talk about that transition and then your growth strategy at Wright Pierce?
The transition for me was, I mean, a lot of hard work and able to perform on projects, sort of got the opportunity to start managing them. And very quickly, they were going through an leadership succession at the time. And I just had that opportunity. So, as far as growth, I mean, to some degree, it was the only thing on the menu. I mean, that was just the mode of the firm. A high achieving firm. I mean, there was a little bit of a chip on its shoulder. I mean, they were very high powered people who at the time just chose to live in Maine. Either they were from Maine or they chose to live in Maine, but they came from some of the best schools and they came from some of the best organizations. They just wanted to live there. So there was this we were doing some incredible things.
How large was the firm at this time?
I think I joined probably in the 60s number of employees, one office. So it was when I became one of the major owners. Well, number one, growth was on the menu. There wasn't really a choice. And I had a ton of debt because I bought in. I mean, I maxed out everything on my home equity line of credit for the down payment. And it got to a point where my wife at some point said, I don't want to know about this anymore. Stop talking to me about this. You're really stressing me out. And if you think it's going to work, I trust you, but please don't mention it ever again.
Look at that entrepreneurial move, though, like leveraging a home equity line to buy into a firm for ownership. I love that.
Right. So, I mean, we were definitely a growth strat. We were aligned, and I wasn't the only one. I mean, there was the 18 years I was there, 15 of it as one of the major owners, and principals. There were 7 or 8 of us that were sort of all major owners, at the time. And it was aligned growth, and it was all organic. I think at the very end, we bought a 1 or 2 person firm because we wanted some, internal instrumentation and control, programming, coding, but it was all organic. Although we had the saying, like, as the years went, and there was a lot of consolidation in New England at the time. And, we had sort of this unofficial saying, or at least, I did in my little circle, like, we love M&A, other people's M&A, because the, larger firms were buying out smaller firms. And we're just like, hey, We really love competing with you. You've been bought out after the promises are unkept or after you stay 1 year. We will welcome you back home to a small mid-sized organization where you're not a number. So reach back out to us. We'll call you in 6 to 8 months, a year. And we grew through other people's M&A because the reality is most of it fails. It's really geared towards,
Not easy.
it's the wedding day. Everyone wants the wedding day to happen, but they're less interested in the marriage. And that's why a majority of them sort of fail to live to fruition. So we sort of sponged off other people's failed M&A for a long time. One great employee, one great client at a time. We realized quickly our bread and butter was in rural communities, northern New England communities. And as we started transitioning, because we were in kind of treatment, we did a lot of things, but treatment plants were kind of what we were known for if we were niched in anything. But after you build a treatment plant, what are you going to do for the next 20, 30 years? Right? Yeah. You move into collection system, distribution systems, other public works type things. So if we're going to continue to grow, we need to get out of just northern communities, right? To find treatment plants. So we started venturing south. And one of the things we realized is, wow, actually we can get paid 3-4 times as much for the same project in southern New England than we can in northern New England. It's no more complicated. I mean, add a number, right? So it's larger, but it's not more complicated. In fact, in some ways it's easier because to do work in rural communities, northern communities, in the case of New England, you actually have the same skill set, but it's harder. You have to be more innovative because there's just less money to go around. And you have to be really fighting and scratch for grant funding. There's low user bases. And so it really has to be sustainable. And so anyway, our natural inclined skill set just led us to be very successful in some of the larger communities. I mean, the mindset was different. We weren't just meeting with public works directors. We had to start meeting with mayors and different. So is it kind of a different how you approach the work? Getting it?
How it's always done didn't necessarily work in Maine.
Right. I mean, we're just different people in charge.
Yeah.
Right. Different layers you had to kind of go through in some of the larger communities. But I mean, we figured that was the hardest thing. I mean, for me, that was the hardest thing to figure out because I think technically we loved competing with the bigger firms because we're like, well, we think we're smarter than you. We could come up with a better solution for less money for our clients, but I don't have the relationships yet.
Yeah,
so that's
relationships are hard to build. And I want to expand on your competing against companies that were going through a merger or an acquisition. And the challenge that those firms go through is they have to blend two different cultures and think about the amount of effort it takes to integrate two teams and two companies that operate totally differently. That's another job in itself, which means a lot of the people that are working in those companies are going to be distracted from actually executing their work. So there's bound to be some pain points in the client experience. There's bound to be a shakeup in relationships. Longer term relationships are going to be reconsidered. Like, how is this new company going to change things for me? So that people in those circumstances are going to be open to conversations, which is what opens the door for people like Wright Pierce at that time, right?
Always has, always will.
Hey everyone, quick break from the episode. If you're enjoying today's episode, please send this to a friend, like, share, comment, subscribe. It's the only way we're going to help more people. Let's get back to the show.
You grow through producing value. Now you can buy contracts, you can buy a farm, pick the fruit, but that doesn't make you a farmer. Like next season, you have to sort of integrate and grow again and plant a new crop. So it's really not growth. You're just buying some revenue. You're hoping people stick around. You're buying some AR. And so, but it's not, again, buying a farm doesn't make you a farmer. And I think that's a little bit of a misnomer. And once you fall out of the ability to create organic growth, attract great clients, attract great employees and develop employees and create those opportunities. Once you can't do that anymore, the only way to quote unquote grow is to buy things. But it's just financial transactions, and then you need more money, and then you're susceptible to outside forces, and all of a sudden you have investors controlling professionals and not professionals, leveraging business. And I mean, that's kind of my owner-led filter is, well said. I want to help professionals leverage business. I don't really want to help business leverage professionals because whether you're talking physicians, accountants, attorneys or engineers, architects, like business shouldn't be dominant in a profession. The profession should just learn better business skills.
When I think about mergers and acquisitions, or how I communicate this internally at H&O, if we do make an acquisition, which is part of our strategy, we're choosing to buy client relationships, people, and cash flow. What we're choosing in that is we're choosing those things, but we're also choosing to take on culture debt, because we're going to be smashing two cultures together. And we as a team have to understand what that decision means. And then we have to have a strategy on how we're going to overcome and pay back that culture debt to make that a worthy investment. And we have to make sure we have our attributes of a company that we're looking to buy to make sure that we're putting ourselves in a position to succeed. But to your point, we always want the competitive comparison to be like, what if we just marketed and moved into this new region? What's the best growth strategy for our company at that time, given our options?
Right. And I think M&A can be beautiful, and it buys you time, because you could do it organically. But if you can find an organization that it works for them, and you are an add to them and they're an add to you, it can definitely be 1 + 1 = 3, 1 + 1 = 4. But the deal is you have to do the upfront work. You have to realize you're paying capital to buy time. But if a principal type person and maybe a team is 6 to 8 to 12 months upfront to make sure that we should have a wedding day, to take that analogy, that same principal or team needs to spend 6, 8, 12 months on the back end, making sure the marriage is off to a great start. For sure. Because most of the people who are involved in the deal, you feed them on the wedding day and you never see them again. And so, but in the ones that really have the tail are the ones that succeed, because now you didn't just buy us and now want us to, you actually did buy us for a reason, or you gave us this opportunity. So it is beautiful when it works. The reality is it doesn't work often.
Doesn't work often. That's true. I want to make sure we have enough time to dive into ActionsProve and strategic planning, executive coaching, the masterminds. To wrap up this conversation about Wright Pierce, I had two other things I wanted to hit on. One of those was how you actually grew organically in other regions. So could you share, what other regions did you expand in from Portland? How many times did you guys do this?
Well, we opened a number of, I think when I left, when I exited, I think we maybe had 9 offices, majority of those across New England, 1 in New York, and we had just opened our first office in Florida. And part of that was to move to a place that was growing and not just relying on aging infrastructure and increased regulation, right? Which was, very important for us. But if I think about our offices, the best office growth was when a principal decided to move.
That was it.
Principal from the office either decided to drive there every day or most days, or physically got up and moved. When we opened offices without that, we had multiple hires and let goes and never the right combo, and a good project manager who had no leadership there. We had, I'll take that on as a side project. And we had some people who were just not at all interested, said, not me. We had some that were more talk than action, more sizzle than steak in taking on it, and other people who did it, but it was a side gig. Those always failed.
Yeah.
One combination that we had that worked really well with sort of our regional, first outside of the region push, if you will, into kind of from New England to Florida, is we had an incredible business developer, credible person, number one, but just great skill set, connected in the Florida market in water, wastewater. We had a former employee who lived there that wanted to come back. So we had the combination of and they were connected at a firm, but so the business developer came with the project engineer at the time who knew us from back then. We had another senior kind of, not a principal, but someone senior project manager who was going to relocate down to the Orlando area. So we started that office with 3, an incredible local presence, a project engineer who knew us, and a project manager who moved down there. that was a great combo that didn't involve a principal moving. So
nice.
that, I mean, and again, we made a lot of, and in this time, right, all these new ventures, right, it's 3 to 5 years before it makes hay. I mean, and that, if you think it's going to be a year, it's not. If you're not willing to put in, but I mean, in our experience, but I see that across, like, it's been 3 years, should we pull the plug? I'm like, no, not 3 feet from gold. Like, maybe you have the wrong person, maybe you made, but give it 3 to 5 years, because clients are only going to throw you a bone. They're not going to give you the big stuff. You're going to have to go through the gauntlet of, missed proposal, you didn't get selected on this. You went through I mean, they're going to want to make sure you have staying power. Mm-hmm. So it's to some degree, it's a law of numbers.
That's a great lesson. If I think about a timeline from H&O, it was really a 3 to 5 year runway for us to really build into our target market. We were sustainable and growing and doing great things, but we were servicing a lot of our portfolio outside of our target market. It took time to build into that. So very similar timeline.
Well, even when I started ActionsProve, I mean, I was like, I'll do this and I'll be making the same money as I was in 1 to 2 to maybe 3 years. It took 3 to 5 years. I mean, it's like now, like it's so much better in many respects than it was, because I'm kind of doing my own thing, and it's but it took 3 to 5 years. So who am I fooling? Like, you know what I mean? That just seems to always be the number when I ask other people, like, honestly, what did it take? Like 3 to 5 years. Yeah. So it's just new value, because you're not really sure what you're doing yet. You got to figure it out. Then you have to find the right people who resonate with you. I mean, it's a process. So if you're looking for, again, that's where like some of the I want to flip you in 3 to 5 years. Like, well, are you really going to maximize? I mean, it's almost too short. And so you need a longer term investment horizon if you're really going to grow it versus just have a financial transaction.
Great takeaway. The last piece here is partnership, something I've seen frequently outside of this industry and in the AEC world. Is as ownership transition, let's say it's second or third generation ownership where there's been some internal sales, right? So new owners, it seems like you had at least 8 majority owners and maybe some other minority owners. What I've seen happen are people start to associate their worth in what they do or don't have to do because they are a shareholder. And what can happen is people start just sitting in the seat, taking in income, but not actually producing. How do you manage that across a company as you scale with so many owners that all want a seat at the table?
Yeah, I mean, it is a real thing. I see it expressed a lot. I've in a lot of different ways. I mean, to some degree, right? I mean, you have to make good decisions. But that being said, I mean, sometimes people change, and one of the lenses, so there is people buy in and there's an ownership deal, but I'll say the most successful firms, there is some. I mean, if you're an income stock or a growth stock, right? If you're a growth stock, you're not seeing something until you retire. You see the value, but it's paper value until you retire. If it's an income stock, like a lot of S corps, I mean, you're getting paid each year, right? Because your distribution. Yep. That being said, I mean, I'd say the most successful firms, and this was the ratepayers model at the time, is there was shareholder distributions, but then there was a meaningful piece that was incentive compensation. Mm-hmm. And if someone was warming the seat and didn't make the firm grow or make the pie bigger, pie more profitable, however we phrased it at the time, you got your distribution because that's law, right? But you didn't necessarily get a big bonus. Mm-hmm. And sometimes there's someone who owned less that did a lot. They got a bigger bonus. So you can normalize some things. When I work with firms today, and that happens, right? I mean, eventually you have to make a decision, right? And you can make a decision by normalizing things through taking a piece of what would be distributed and turn it into incentive comp. So you can make stuff work, right? And so that is an incentivized, but there ultimately are people, when someone maybe isn't motivated the way they used to, sometimes it's a season change. Sometimes someone's burned out, like truly burned out, and they're disengaging. And so and you have to deal with that a little differently. Sometimes it's malice, but not often, right? Sometimes it's just, they're just really burnt out and they need a break. And sometimes I kind of rail against this. Like, success in our industry shouldn't be a life sentence. we need to evolve, right? We need to evolve as leaders. We need to evolve as organizations. And so sometimes, I mean, there is a huge burnout factor. That being said, to get people excited again about their role, again, a lot of times we become principals, we become leaders, and we still have all the other baggage, right? Because we haven't built the team yet and all of this. So we just have more and more responsibility. I always think of it that aside. Let's just say it's just I've lost my love of the industry. I've lost my mojo. I kind of present it as, for you as a group or as an individual, is leadership a reward or a responsibility?
Great question.
And because you should be rewarded, like you've probably done incredible things to get to this point, and you should be rewarded, and you do have ownership and you do have control, and so that's okay. Let's celebrate that. However, if it's all about you and you're milking the cow, that is not inspirational to anyone else. And you will follow the S curve and you will peak and decline and you will be less relevant and less effective. If you see it as a responsibility, which means you have to work a little harder, a little differently at least, it's going to be, you have the opportunity to inspire others and sort of pivot the sigmoid curve into a new growth sequence for you and for your team and for the firm. And so sometimes it's just talking through this, because a lot of us, we're siloed in our organizations. We're siloed into busy and consumed all day long. And we know one thing. And so kind of just having those conversations and realizing that people are in different seasons of life. And sometimes you need farming, right? Just take that. You don't not have fallow seasons. You don't plant different crops. I mean, you don't go and try to be successful. You don't build muscle and not have rest periods. And you're not peak performance of an athlete without rest periods. And so anyway, there is that sort of thing. Again, it could be less than great intentions, but mostly when I see people kind of just having a seat, either they should just be gone because they don't love this and want nothing to do with it anymore. So just go. But sometimes it's sort of a burned out and I don't know what to do next type thing too.
And if it's left undiscussed, it's never going to improve. So it's like you need to make that an open part of the communication. Because
then there's some frustration, there's some fear, there's resentment that builds. And, you grow from really liking and respecting partners to, I respect you, but you're bothering me. And then, and so again, and that's a fine line to really like and respect versus just respect, or I'm losing respect. And sometimes it's not necessarily what that person is doing. It's us.
Need to communicate for sure. And what you explained there is a really good breakdown of compensation of an owner. If you're a shareholder in a company and you work in the company, you have your base compensation. That's your salary and benefits, right? Guaranteed no matter what. So for my performance in the company, for the role that I sit in, and all shareholders are going to have different seats, right? Some might be associate principal, division leader. They should have a base compensation comparative to their role in the company. Then you mentioned performance-based compensation, however that's structured. They have their variable compensation. The distribution, the dividend, that's their return because they're a shareholder. Has nothing to do with what they're doing in the business. That's their shareholder return. It's like owning a stock, right?
Right. And that's why to some degree you have to be careful, because I could go buy Tesla stock, but I bought this, right? And I can't sell it. And there's actually restrictions on it. And it's different. So again, to understand it's a transaction, but it's a meaningful transaction. It means but what's the conditions? Are you selling stock or giving stock away because you're a great employee and you're loyal, or are you doing it because we think you can grow the business? I mean, you have to be clear on that transaction and the expectations, because you can't change the rules like, oh, we're afraid people are going to leave us, and so let's give them stock. Well, why aren't they producing? Why aren't they growing the company? Because they're not entrepreneurial. Like that wasn't the bargain. And I see that a lot. I mean, we made some of those sort of mistakes too. You kind of yin and yang a little bit and you kind of regret it. But at the same time, they're great employees. And so you have a bifurcated, like, what does stock mean? And it gets confusing. So it's a little bit of a mess.
Thank you for sharing your background. That to me is a really important part of your story. Now you're in your, let's call it your second career, what's become your true passion, ActionsProve. You've walked the walk, you've expanded, you've led teams, you've worked in the industry and experienced all of these things. And it gives you such a great perspective to actually advise on and support executive teams and companies in our industry. So quick refresh, could you share the ways that ActionProve helps AEC leaders and AEC firms?
Well, yeah, but I mean, primarily, I mean, so what do I do? I mean, I definitely have that perspective, and it's a growing perspective, right? I'm not relying on 30 years ago we did this. Like, I mean, because with the podcast and with the independent research and the work, I mean, it's very current, and I do that by design, right? I'm not going to rely on what was successful in the 90s or early 2000s, because that's less relevant today, especially now in this new era, right?
The perspectives are still valuable.
No.
Execution and the strategy might change, but the principles are the same.
Right. Well, I will say we're kind of in a new era with native digitals, and I mean, it's so, but yeah, it all works together. But if you didn't have relevance today, so that being said, strategic planning is there, and I want to say that I mean, there's a progression to that, right? And a lot of times it's organizational development and operations assistance. It's leadership team getting on the same page. It's leadership team once on the same page, getting on the same page with the next generation. There's some just development work that goes in, because you can only meet people where they are and progress them. I mean, there's some firms that you really are strategizing. We're niching down. We're being very purposeful and linear and binary with what market we want to serve and how will we become the experts. Knowledge is dead. As we've known it for 100 years, right? It is because of AI, because of different. It's not about knowing things, because the cost to basic knowledge is zero. With ChatGPT and all the other things, right?
It's becoming commoditized.
Right. So it's about applied knowledge. It's about execution excellence. It's about having trusted relationships. So it's different today in that sense. And there are firms that are zoning in on that. But sometimes it's just, let's get on the same page and talk about this. And it's a little bit of a slower progression. So there's a lot around sort of strategic development and teamwork. And I think that's important. Getting the next generation involved is absolutely important, on the same page to sort of bridge some gaps that exist.
100%.
So that's a big piece of what I do. Culture design but that's really kind of tying into values and describing values in terms of behavior and linking them back into what we want to do. So I will say, like, one theme that goes through a lot of my work with leaders and organizations is forcing function for critical and strategic thinking to figure out what your next best move is in the context of where you want to go and what we're up against. And I want to say people are just so busy and consumed, and that does not mean you're hacking in the right direction.
Correct.
There's too much at stake today to not make sure you're hacking in the right, know where you want to go and solve for that versus figure it out on the way. Too much figured it out on the way. And that's going to hurt people, and it doesn't inspire the next generation. In fact, it's hurting leaders to not cast that vision.
Virtually all private businesses, this is every industry, AE included, are underperforming in some capacity. There's a million flaws we could go over, but if you don't have strategic planning, that's the domino to all of your other problems. So if you're like, what is strategic planning? We've never really done that. Or the owner's thinking like, hey, I know where we're going, but the company doesn't. That is your domino. You need to do strategic planning. Could you talk about your strategic planning process and how you go through, let's say, educating your prospective clients on the importance of strategic planning?
Yeah. It's very important, and it's the process as much as the result, right? Because
1,000%.
It's like the whole Mike Tyson, right? It's all great until you get punched in the face. Like, I mean, it's all, but I'll say with the numbers, I mean, I don't know, half the firms strategically plan, half don't. Right. And maybe it's a function of size or, arrogance or whatever. They can maybe not, but it's just so busy and haven't done it.
Even half.
Right. But then the ones that do it, right. I mean, the statistics are anecdotal, and there's even some studies. 90% of strategic plans fail to be fully implemented. Right. So there's how do you be of the subset of firms that do strategic planning? How do you become the top 10%? That's really what we should be. So a lot of my strategic planning is focused on, will you actually execute this? How do we figure out the nut that you will move forward with? Because that is the actual difference maker. Mm-hmm. Communication is a huge piece. But as it relates to strategic planning, I mean, there is this, it's kind of like, there's the basic mechanics, right? You can Google it, you can ChatGPT it. I mean, there's a progression: vision, mission, goals, objectives, strategies, tactics, and actions, right? And in the middle there's clearly defined what winning is. What does it look like? Paint a picture. Know the scoreboard. Don't just make it a mystery, right? So you can go through that progression. But I would say this, the mechanics and the magic. The magic is who needs to be in the room? Who's really interested in this? How expansive? What topics I'm going to build a model, right? I mean, there's 3 things we got to do. We need to get work. We need to have people do the work, and we need to get better. Right. And on top of those 3 things, we need to communicate this, and we need the structure that's going to enable that. Right. So you got to build this model. Where do you start first? What's the limit indicator? And maybe you need to give them a win. So this isn't your biggest problem, but let's get a win. So to me, it's the magic is who's involved. How do you start? How do you ask the right questions? And it gets into growing a firm and scaling a firm. I do a lot of, I want to talk to the principals. I want to talk to the next generation. I want to talk to the best people you've hired that might be just out of school. Who are your high posts? I want to talk to 10% of the company, depends on the size of the company. And that is extremely non-scalable because it is one-on-one combat, getting information, getting insight so that I can ask the right questions, put the right issues on the table, figure out the magic, if you will. But it gets into growing a business, right? You want to grow a business, you want to grow your team. The reality is it's a bunch of non-scalable things you need to do to then scale, right? I think you taught me this you were just so articulate with it in our interview. Like you have to have real relationships. Well, that's non-scalable. But once you have them, it's extremely scalable. You have to take overhead time, which I love the way your passive income hours. That so resonates with me today. And invest that in a process and a system, and then teach people, and then coach them. And so all these non-scalable things that when you get it right, it's a credible flywheel, right?
Sure is.
And so to me, it's like, what is the non-scalable things we can do to enable the scale? Again, a lot of times we don't even like each other. We don't get along. We don't talk enough. So let's talk about some things. Should we do leadership development before the strategy, right? And again, a lot of times people are hung up on strategy. And I'm like, until you have the top of the equation, vision, mission, goals, objectives, and define what winning looks like. Because is winning an exit for you?
Yeah.
Is winning, or is winning an opportunity for others? I don't want to judge it. Just tell me what it is, and we can, we can talk about it. Are you
creates
practitioners
context throughout the entire company?
Right. Are you practitioners who lead on the side? Okay. Or are you leaders who also practice? It's a major filter. And tell me who you are and who you want to be. Like, well, this is what we are. This is what we want to go. Okay, well, let's work on that. So, I mean, there is a lot to it. I mean, people who come in, we do this and we want it. We'll talk to 14 people and we'll give you a report, and then we'll do a 1.5 day retreat and we'll do these things. And here's your plan. I'm calling BS. It doesn't work. It will not work. It's a process, not an event. I mean, there are key milestone events in there. Don't get me wrong. But if you truly are going to meet people where they are and strategically plan and get to a point where you can actually build a strategy that differentiates you, by and large, almost every situation, unless they're just an extremely well-oiled machine, that's not going to cut it. But it's convenient for the people who are doing it. We just have to be there for the weekend. But it's not right for the organizations. And again, I approached the strategic planning with what I know didn't work, what I thought was a waste of time, what I thought was a missed opportunity with our facilitators, whether we hired big people from away, whether we tried to do it ourselves. I mean, I inform what I do based on what I thought worked and what I thought, no, that's not, you're not even asking the right questions. And so because you're not interested in me.
Asking the right questions is the superpower.
Right. And I think you already have an answer and you're just going through the motions. So why would I tell you what I really think? And I don't trust you. And you haven't built a relationship with me, facilitator, so that I don't think you're going to throw me under the bus. Yep. Like, who are you? Are you working for one person or are you working for the board? Are you working for the, so anyway, I approach it very differently. And if someone is interested in an event, or just a facilitator, I'm like, I don't know, I'll give you names of other people. And so I find that just a little...
It's a good lesson in right fit clients.
Well, right. So it's like, to me, it's like, I will bounce between a consultant, a facilitator / coach, and an accountability partner.
Yeah.
And I've got to use my spidey senses to figure out which one do you need right now? Which one do you want?
Yeah.
And so again, kind of figured that this gets into the 3 to 5 years. I figured out who I resonate with, and I figure out who resonates with me. And, at this point, I want joy and want to make an impact myself. So
the misstep I see in strategic planning, you ask, say, a business owner or a select group of people at the top of the company and ask if they do strategic planning. 9 out of 10 times, 99 out of 100, they're going to say yes. The question is do they go through a process? Are these things written down? And does the entire company understand the strategic planning process and the outcomes from that? Because a lot of times it's just in the owner's head. And if it's up there, I can guarantee no one else in the company knows what the hell's going on and where the company's going.
And I'll say there's a flaw in just keeping it in your head because you're not objectively looking at it. And there's beauty in having it even on a whiteboard or even talking it through with somebody else because it's lonely at the top and you're in your own head and you're figuring stuff out. I mean, that gets into some of the executive coaching or strategic advisory work. Get it out of your head. Think about it. And it gets into some of the beauty of the mastermind. I mean, there's things in our heads, right? And you say it out loud sometimes and you're like, is that what I'm thinking? No, that's not what I'm thinking. And so, there's beauty in talking. There's beauty in writing something out. There's beauty in getting feedback in a very safe environment, whether that be one-on-one or with a group. Because it's hard to be a leader. I mean, it truly is.
It sure is.
If we're truly going to lead and shepherd people, right? Original definition of this thing, right? It should be about the people, not about the thing. The thing is an outcome. The people are
leadership's about service,
right?
Not about the individual. You wrote a book, an author, Reversing Burnout, and I think it's a good topic to kind of close out on today because burnout of the workforce is probably one of the biggest challenges the industry faces in architecture and engineering. Could you talk about that book? What causes burnout? How do we reverse it?
Yeah. Well, when
you could just summarize a book in here in like 2 minutes,
Yeah. Well, the highlights. Right. The reality is, I burned out. Right. I didn't recognize at the time. There's no words for it. But I really, why did I fall out of love with something I wanted to do passionately at the quote unquote peak or near peak of my career? I burned out. Once I decided I don't want to do this, it sparked a journey. We're not the time to get into this, but I had a parallel life alongside my time. I spent a dozen years with a partner of mine, and we led service mission teams in and out of Central America. Over a dozen years, we led 30 teams of people building infrastructure, doing asset-based community development work. And that was such a respite for me. And I learned people, and I just had a whole different, I had a transformation between I love people and organizations as much as projects and profits, and maybe more because that's actually the key. So I changed during this. And so I couldn't understand. I had this parallel life and it was eating at me. And anyway, I put there's a lot of sacrificing, kind of doing everything that I did too. And I didn't have words for it. So when I realized what had happened, I just did the very engineering thing. And I said, okay, well, what happened? What would I have done differently if I could do things differently? So that was kind of once I figured this out through a year and a half of journaling and writing and figuring stuff, I had a bunch of really great friends who said, you need to write this. And I said, no, I can write a killer proposal. I can write great reports, but I'm not a writer. And so anyway, it was a lot of great encouragement. My first mastermind group that I joined forced me to do that with accountability. And same thing, they forced me to do the podcast a year later than I probably should have. But anyway, I think, breaking it down, what causes it by definition now, and this wasn't available back then, but it's chronic, unmanaged work stress is what leads to burnout. And and I work with, it's always playing in the background now, right? I say it disproportionately affects high achievers. It will not affect your middlers. It will not affect low achievers. So in that sense, it's a leadership problem to solve because it's your opportunity, and your highest achievers, and if they burn out, they disengage. Disengaged people at the top are horrible for an organization. There's no way you're going to win with that. So let's solve this. And we, in our data this year, Anthony and I doing that report, it was very clear that the firms that are attracting and retaining the best talent are 3 times less, they report 3 times less frequent work stress. almost 2.5 times less burnout. So they're solving this, right? And there's a move to teams. There's a lot that gets involved. But anyway, in the book, I approach the mechanics of it, kind of laid out that a big piece of this is changing life seasons. What motivates someone at 25, 35, and 45 is not the same as 55 and 65. We have to recognize that there's different life seasons, work seasons, but just spending the time to think about it is absolutely critical, especially if you're a high achiever. And again, we should be able to achieve great values in a high performance atmosphere is what attracts talent today. How do we do that sustainably? And so that was the book that was me figuring things out. I mean, my second book that I'm authoring now and hope to have out pretty soon is kind of on redesigning work for greater team success, because I think that is the key to the high performance hamster wheel. All that we're on today, and the ability to not be out on an island and have to be Michael Jordan for everything. And anyway, there's a lot to that, but our system is set up to create burnout and superheroes. Sure. And even the 5, 10, 20% of firms that have superhero capability, they're sort of rejecting it. So it's a horrible business model to be built on the superhero theory. And that we have to move to high performance teams. And the firms that I see that are doing phenomenally have made that shift from superheroes to high performing teams. And it is a lot easier said than done. There's a ton that goes into that. And that's been a lot of my last year, that shift. And now we have a name for it. We have a process for it.
Love that. Even just the message in shifting from an individual superhero to a team, I think paints a really good picture on part of the solution to burnout, right? If we're on an island facing this stress and all of the surmounting challenges and hurdles we have to come over, and we feel like we're doing it ourselves and there's nowhere else we can lean on or help solve those problems, that in itself is going to create a lot of burnout. So I love the sense of team there as a solution.
Yeah. And we've been taught that. I mean, there's a lot of, I'm 30 years, 51 years old. And that was all I was taught. No, there was no malice, but that was what we were taught. We weren't taught to build a team. We weren't taught to delegate really well. And there's a lot that goes into sort of the re-engineering of the 90s, which means gutting middle management. And then the transition to PCs. People typed their own letter, did their own CAD. There's this whole generation of people who are in the industry today with 25, 30, 35 years experience who were never had the benefit of having a team. And you throw in the great recession where we had no young talent. There's people who were required to do more with less. And now it's like, go delegate to a group. Okay. And we have a bunch of people with more than 20 years experience and a bunch of people with less than 10. There's no middle. It's stressful. And what are you going to do? We have a shape problem. And teams are an antidote to that too, but that's a whole different kind of thing. But we just, again, stop and think about where you are and how we grew up in this industry. It's hard to get off the superhero hamster wheel.
Sure is. ActionsProve, great resource. Could you share some of the resources? We know the book, there's the podcast is AEC Leadership Today.
Yes.
All right. And you're a speaker, you're active on LinkedIn and these masterminds. So where can people go to learn more about you and all of these offerings?
Everything is on my website, actionsprove.com. You can reach out to me there. Everything's ungated. I want at this season of my career, I just want to provide value. And I think maybe even our present and future of work in engineering and architecture, I think maybe the first month or two, we might gate that, but that's eventually ungated. But I actually think it's ungated right now on my website because that's just the way it is. But everything is there. But reach out to me on LinkedIn if you want to connect. And again, this season is just, I've had a lot of incredible seasons in this profession. And I love this season. And if someone, a high achiever who cares an awful lot about their organization and serving their people and serving their clients, like caring is a major filter, and you want to get better and you want to get better for other people, call me and talk to me. I will share whatever resources that I can have, that I have.
You're a great asset, Pete. So thank you for sharing. 2 questions to close out. Your top book or podcast that you'd recommend?
Books are tough. Like I will read books if, someone I'm exploring like a podcast guest, and I read a great book on AI and had, Mehdi Nabash on the podcast a couple of times talking about AI. So I've been doing that. I have friends write books and ask me to read them. And so leadership, I will read a book for that. We're learning. I guess I don't read for pleasure, although learning is pleasure for me. So, right. Podcast, I listen to a lot of podcasts, whether I'm driving or running. I like adjacencies. Like I will, content marketing, but real insight marketing. So a lot of marketing podcasts I'll listen to, but really kind of new era type podcast. I love critical and strategic thinking. Like how is this? I'm a invention wonder person. Like I don't know if you're familiar with the working genius model, but it's a very unusual combination in our industry. And so I always want to say, why is something happening? How do we solve it? So, there's Chris Walker has a great marketing podcast about demand generation. He's a New Hampshire, Boston person.
I went to college with Chris.
Okay. Yeah. So I love his takes on demand generation and quality content, not mediocre stuff. And there's a number in that ilk too, that I think there's sort of, Two Bob's podcast talks about like growing a consulting firm, but that's in sort of marketing, branding. I just love listening to how, as professionals, we can leverage business. Again, not be leveraged by business. And so the adjacencies are where I find a lot of hay.
All right. Love those suggestions. And Chris Walker, so Refine Labs, they were honestly the inspiration and much of the guidance to our marketing strategy to date. It's why I'm on LinkedIn. It's really why I started a podcast. Like I kind of watched how they did it and got some advice from them along the way, but they are very forward thinking and doing a great job. Best advice for emerging leaders?
I'd say, emerging leaders, I'd say it's got to be current and emerging leaders. But I mean, to me, it's like understand the powers. I think emerging leaders get this new era almost more so than current leaders. And no one's wrong in that. It's just busy and consumed and a lot of kind of burnout and stress and going through COVID. Leaders were sort of the last to catch up to some of these major new era shifts. I always say, there's a lot of things, power skills and power habits. Critical and strategic thinking, learning how to communicate better, learning how to connect with individuals more and better, and design for alignment. Those are power skills today. Obviously, they need a self-awareness and emotion intelligence, but critical strategic thinking, communication, connection, and alignment, you need those skills. But as leaders, I think the habits that will sort of lead to those skills, number one, you got to care for people more so than the projects and the profit. Those are the result of people. You need to care about the person. So many personal agency that's just has to be a habit to really think about the people. Always be open to learning. Too much changing too fast. It's lonely at the top. You need peer groups. You need to keep your cup filled, right? As leaders, because it's just so hard. And I'd say the biggest thing, the habit, is you got to own your time. Great people will always be in demand. If you don't own your time and create the spaces to learn, you don't create the spaces to connect with people, you don't create the space to have alignment and critically strategically think, you're done. You're buried. It's just not going to happen if you don't own your time. And there's a lot that goes into that, right? But if that's not a goal and a habit to free yourself up to think, good luck. And so I think that's a habit for any leader.
100%. Pete, thank you so much for your time today and for joining Design Development. I really enjoy your story and loved learning. I love learning from you. Thank you for everything you do for the industry through ActionsProve. I hope you have a great day. Hi, everyone. Real quick before you leave for the day, if we could ask one favor, if you enjoyed today's conversation, if you're enjoying all the conversations on design development, please share this with someone that you think will benefit from it. Our goal is to help as many people in the design, development, and construction industries. And with your help, I think we can spread the word and help more people. Thanks for tuning in and can't wait to hear from you next time.